Hi, I'm Gary Wockner, and I am the host of Overcoming Overshoot on EarthX TV. Today's episode is about the uncomfortable topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about, population growth. But by the time we're done, it's going to be more comfortable for you, and more people are going to be talking about it, which is our goal. I have two amazing guests today, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. First is Bill Ryerson, who's had a long career working on the issue of population growth and currently is the director of the Population Media Center, as well as a board member of the Population Institute. Bill, welcome to the show. You're in Vermont today, right?
I'm in Vermont. Yes, I've been in Vermont now for about 40 years.
And my other guest is Florence Blondel, who formerly worked for Population Matters in the UK and has a master's degree in population and development from the London School of Economics. Florence is a digital media specialist and a blogger on the topic of population. And Florence, you're from Uganda, but today you're in North Carolina. Is that correct?
Yes, born and bred in Uganda.
Okay, great. Well, I'm in Colorado. There's a map of the Indian Peaks Wilderness area right behind me. And of course, EarthX is in Dallas. So this is really, the magic of the internet and Zoom here brings us all together today. Population was one of the biggest issues that we dealt with on Earth Day in 1970, but it's still a huge issue and still a hard conversation to have. We're also going to talk about population in so-called underdeveloped countries and then population growth in developed or higher income countries too. So are you guys ready to go?
All set.
Yes.
Awesome. So Bill, let's just start with you a little bit. Maybe a little bit about your background and how you got into this work. And if you have any kind of like aha moment where you decided, this has to be like my life's work, which it has been for you.
I was a graduate student at Yale University studying ecology and evolutionary biology. And during that time in the late 60s, the faculty of the biology department and the forestry school invited numerous ecologists to come speak about the environmental crisis. And one of those speakers was Paul Ehrlich, a biologist at Stanford University, who in 1968 came and spoke about his brand new book, The Population Bomb. And I read the book before his talk and attended the lecture and then had dinner with him at the home of my advisor, Charles Remington, and was really blown away by what Ehrlich had to say about the influence of population growth on the future prospects of global sustainability. And so then in the following year, I spent quite a bit of time teaching myself about demographics and writing a paper on human population biology for a course that wanted a 15-page paper, but it ended up being 115 pages and became required reading in that course after I submitted it. And in the meantime, that same weekend of Ehrlich's visit, he and Charles Remington, my advisor, and an attorney named Dick Bowers founded the organization Zero Population Growth. And then the following year, in 1969, I started the fourth chapter in the country, and we planned the first Earth Day activities on the Yale campus, and they amazingly got featured in Life magazine's Earth Day issue in April 1970. And at that point, there was really no looking back. I had become an activist, and while I was still working on a PhD, I decided, this is more important than teaching biology at the college level, and I went off to work with the Population Institute and have spent since that time working both globally and domestically. I worked with 2 Planned Parenthood affiliates to understand how family planning services work, but have mostly been involved in international communications related to family planning and reproductive health issues.
And then Florence, very different background, very different personal story. So if you don't mind, please telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into this work, and if you had a kind of an aha moment too, which drove you towards this quest to deal with population growth on the planet.
Yes, thank you, Gary. Well, I come from, like I said, born and bred in Uganda, and I've just come to the developed world just in 2015 when I went to the UK and I got trapped there. But anyway, yes, my haha moment, I think I've been with it since I was born. I come from a big family, never really had it easy. I experienced everything that is, poverty, hunger, bad menarche, that is, bad menstruation as a young girl, everything that can happen to a young girl who is starting her way out in life without knowing anything, just blind. I have too many siblings, some of whom I don't even know. I can't name my cousins or uncles and aunties. Like my paternal grandfather had 45 children. My father had more than, I don't know, 10, 15, probably some I'm yet to find out actually, because every time I ask them, like there could be actually this other woman who had this child. So yes, I've grown around all these issues, and I've felt that girls have been disadvantaged in my country, Uganda, and actually on the continent, and in sub-Saharan Africa in particular. And so when I trained to be a journalist in Kenya, one professor actually said, some of you are going to report about women's issues. I can see. I was like, okay, why not? Like, this is a field that needs to be reported about. It's not reported about enough. So when I joined journalism officially, I did a lot of stories around reproductive health, including HIV. I also reported about environmental issues, looked at the interconnections, and I worked with so many organizations, including the Population Secretariat in Uganda, including UNFPA. So I partnered so much with them doing a series of stories. And really this just, piqued my interest in population issues and issues around, development. So this push meant applying finally for a master's in population and development at the LSE. And I was lucky enough that I got a scholarship. So that's how I ended up there. And the course was really amazing. Like it covered everything that I was doing in my journalism and even more, looking at different relationships, mapping out, even making projections, so I really loved that part about it. And so after I finished, I graduated from LSE, yes, I ended up staying, and I needed to find like an organization which was in rhyme with things that I was passionate about. And I was lucky enough, after a year or two, I found Population Matters, because it's after things that I'm passionate about, young girls and women's rights, as well as the environment. They have the mix. So I was just like, wow, this is ideal. So Population Matters, it's a UK-based charity, but of course it has grassroots organizations that it deals with through its Empower to Plan project. I joined them and I've been happy ever since, because globally they work to address population size and environmental sustainability by promoting positive voluntary solutions, things that I strongly believe in, because I'm a strong believer in fertility reduction, especially in Uganda, because it's what's characterizing us, childbearing, child rearing. It's been with us for a long time. I think it needs to stop. So yeah, that's why I'm here today now.
Bill, back to you, because you've been doing this so many years. Are there a number of programs where young people like Florence can, get bachelor's degrees or master's degree or higher in demography and population studies? I just wonder if we want to send a message to young people watching, which are, probably the majority of our audience who want to get into this topic. What are sort of the paths into working on this issue?
There are many different academic programs. Of course, demography is taught at many universities. Also, there are places like University of North Carolina that have specialties in population studies. And there's public health, of course, taught at many universities. Public health is a great entry point into this field because of understanding both the practice of public health and how it relates to reproductive health. So certainly those are good backgrounds. As I mentioned before, my background is in ecology, and understanding ecological systems and population biology is also a very useful background. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with provision of family planning services, but it's a great perspective for understanding the issue of sustainability, which in many ways is the most important issue that we're dealing with in terms of both human health and human rights, as well as environmental issues, because if the ecological system collapses, all bets are off.
And Florence, when you were in Uganda, in the United States here, of course, people talk about population growth a lot, and they talk about population growth in Africa, of course. Are there a number of people in Uganda and elsewhere in Africa that you have met who are professionally involved in this issue? And are young people getting involved in it too? Or are you kind of an anomaly?
No, I'm not actually an outlier. Most people are getting interested, and the government is also on board. Like I said, we have a population secretariat, a whole population secretariat. Even at university, there are population studies. Bill has PMC working there in Uganda. So UNFPA has been on ground for a long time. We always commemorate World Population Day. Practically every Ugandan knows that it exists. We celebrate World Environmental Day. So we know about these interconnections. Like you read our biodiversity report and you see population being listed as a problem. You read anything, health related, and it's all interconnected. People really know that there is an issue with population. They know our population is growing. They know it's, limiting young people from achieving their goals. And young people are also on board, of course, but they need more information. I feel like that is still lacking. Like as a nation, we know we have a problem. We know it's there. It's in our reports, and it's what we are good at anyway, having great reports. But I think we need to communicate it some more so that we know, because there's a lot behind the drive, what's driving our population growth. And some people are just fine because they don't make these interconnections. But yes, people are coming on board. I'm not an outlier, of course. But of course, when you go to most newsrooms, you find that most journalists sometimes shy away from these issues. Like, oh, they're a bit technical, they're a bit complicated. So yes, that's how I ended up even having two bits, like carrying the environmental desk as well as the health desk. Yes, but yeah, more needs to be done, but it's being reported about. Yeah, it's happening. And
Bill, tell us a little bit more about the Population Media Center. You're active in a number of different countries around the world. Sort of what's your model and what's your theory of change and just kind of how it works?
Sure. The factors behind the decision to start Population Media Center, which I founded in 1998, are very clearly, and a lot of people don't understand this, what's stopping people from using family planning is primarily misinformation and cultural barriers, not lack of access to contraceptive services. And what's driving population growth is, of course, lack of family planning and high desired family size. So for example, in West Africa, desired family size is actually above the fertility rate. For example, in Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, fertility rate's 5.7 children born to the average woman during her reproductive years. And when women are asked in the Demographic and Health Survey how many children they want, they say 7, and men say 9. In Niger, fertility rate is 7.6. Women want 11, men want 13. So high desired fertility is driving large family size. But even in countries and in families where people don't want additional children, lack of use of family planning affects about 225 million women, or 225 million women, or 450 million men and women. So huge number of people who don't want an additional child but are not using family planning. And a lot of policymakers have assumed, well, the problem must be lack of access to services. But in fact, in the demographic and health surveys, when people are asked, why aren't you using contraception? The top reasons are, I've heard it's dangerous, my husband's opposed, my religion's opposed, or I think God determines how many children I'm going to have and there's nothing I can do about it. So fatalism. And lack of access is only cited by 1% to 2%. So I started Population Media Center fundamentally to address these issues of misinformation and cultural barriers and to model smaller family norms. And so our theory of change is role modeling is a key way people learn and learn about what the norms are. And I think all of us can think about people who have influenced us. There's a whole study of the psychology of behavior adoption and behavior modification by Stanford psychologist Albert Bandura, who has looked at what makes a role model more or less influential. And what's very clear from his research is that role models similar to me, but slightly aspirational, are the most influential. So in fact, we create, with the advice of Bandura and others who have studied behavior change, we create long-running entertainment serialized dramas on radio and television. And we've done this in over 50 countries. We've reached over 500 million people because these are entertainment shows with cliffhangers at the end of each episode and programs that go on for sometimes 200 episodes. And during the time they're on the air, as in all melodrama, there are good and evil characters battling over various issues. And in our formulation, they're middle of the road characters designed to represent segments of the audience. And they gradually sort out the conflicting advice from positive and negative characters. And they gradually evolve into positive role models for the audience on issues like daughter education, stopping child marriage, use of family planning, small family norms, as well as environmentally protective behaviors and other issues. And what we have found is in each country where we're able to attract a large audience, and in some countries we've had over half the population in the audience, as these characters evolve and discover the benefits of things like family planning, the audience follows suit. And we're never telling the audience what to do. We're just demonstrating the consequences of different behaviors, positive, negative, and these transitional characters and their newly discovered behaviors. And the audience is in love with the characters and intrigued by how their lives are improving by doing things like sending their daughters to school and adopting family planning. And the influence on audience behavior is immense. So to give you just a couple of examples, in Sierra Leone, we did a radio serial drama. Radio is still the dominant medium in much of sub-Saharan Africa. And it attracted half the population of the country as regular audience members, at least weekly. This was a twice-a-week show for 2 years. And at family planning clinics, when new family planning clients were asked what motivated the visit to the clinic, 50% of them answered Sally Wansai, the name of the program. In northern Nigeria, a program that we broadcast across 4 northern Nigerian states attracted 71% of the population. And at 11 clinics that asked new family planning clients why they had come, 67% of them named the program. And then one mathematical calculation we did that is really a demonstration of why this strategy is so important. The cost of all 208 episodes in the Nigerian context, the writing, acting, production, the primetime air purchase across the 4 states, and all the survey research costs and clinic interview costs, divided by the number of people who adopted family planning and attributed that decision to the program, came out to 30 cents US. So it's the most cost-effective strategy we have found for addressing population issues in a human rights context, just by role modeling behaviors and teaching the audience through entertainment the benefits of adopting healthful and sustainable norms.
So, Florence, I would say that in Uganda, you are somewhat of a role model for young women there. And I just wonder, as you've gone through this transition yourself from growing up in a family where the norms were very similar that Bill mentioned, and now you're in a very different position. What sort of, if you'd like to share with us, sort of obstacles did you run into? Any personal stories there about any pressure you felt and how you overcame that? Because that's kind of, I think, part of the story that Bill is trying to get across, is how individual people can sort of break out and find a new path forward for themselves. Yeah.
Yes, of course, breaking out is important. Obviously, education helped. Uganda, we have low schooling, like the amount of time someone spends in school is less than 7 years. So that's horrible. So I was lucky enough that, I got out of that. I finished my school. I reached as far as I do. Not many people finish primary school, actually. Not many finish secondary. There are few, not many progress to university. So all those challenges, we grow with them, but I was lucky. And of course, there's a high rate of teenage pregnancies in the country, like almost 25, they account for almost 25%. I've seen that happen to some of my friends. I've escaped that. So if you talk about the greatest escape, I've really had that. But I could have been those people because I was orphaned so young. And it's a miracle that I am where I am, because most often when people, children lose their parents in Uganda and in a rural area, because it's mostly a rural area, almost 80% is rural, you're stuck there, you're stuck in the villages, and getting out of that is really hard. Getting out of poverty is so hard. So there's that continuous cycle. I've witnessed child marriages in my journalism. I escaped that. So there are so many things I'm grateful for, by the way, that I escaped. The only thing, I'll say is personal to me right now because of the pressures of having, children, is now that everyone knows that I'm married. Everyone is just wondering, where is your baby? You've been married for what? Coming to 5 years. So it's like once you enter marriage in Uganda, like the first year, baby to prove that you're fertile, that you can give a man a child, that you're African. Trust me, some people think I'm an African at the moment because I do not have, a child after being married for almost 5 years. So there is that pressure, but I don't give in to that because I don't go, like, I have to make the choice, in my own time. And that's the problem we have. We not rush, we are forced into it because most of us, are forced into early marriages when we are so young. And remember, Uganda has a population which is like what, almost 60% are under 17 years. So you can imagine our median age is about 17 actually. Compare that to countries, the UK, where the median age is now what, 40? Others, it's even higher as 50. So ours is a young population. So there's a lot to grapple with as a young girl in the country. When you're sort of child marriages, early child marriage, that's really, it has been coming down, but it's still a huge problem. Like any child really being, I call it selling, because you're sort of practically, there's no one who just goes willingly. It's rape practically, actually, but it's happening. So
Bill, I'm wondering in your work, and maybe both of you can sort of chime in on this. Do you find that the message of giving young people, and especially young women, more rights and opportunities resonates more? And or is it about environmental sustainability and the impacts on nature and wild nature? I mean, how do you kind of tease out which message is the most powerful to like influence the most people?
I don't think many people make family-sized decisions based on global demographic trends or environmental threats of growing population. These are concepts that are sort of removed from people's day-to-day thinking. They're making decisions, as Florence was saying, based on social norms and what's expected of them. And we know social norms can change. We've seen changes in many societies around the world, and particularly in the population area in Asia in the last half century, a dramatic change in desired family size and actual fertility rate. And the Asian tigers, the economic growth that has occurred as a result of lower fertility rate, is one of the major factors that has made Asian countries so wealthy. So helping people understand both the health and economic welfare benefits of smaller family size through storytelling and modeling smaller family norms as socially acceptable is key to changing the situation in places like Uganda. And certainly many people have no understanding of the fact that lower fertility rate is what is one of the major drivers of economic development and improved family financial welfare. They often think, well, if I have 10 children, maybe one of them will turn out to be Bill Gates.
Oh
But
my God.
the chances of that happening are pretty low when they can't afford to send them to school. And as we saw with the demographic dividend in Asia, as people had fewer children, they had more money left over from the costs of food, housing, and clothing, and they could invest in education. They could invest in elective goods that stimulated the manufacturing sector. And the slowing rate of people entering the labor force led to rising wages, which created a middle class. And the ability of people to save money improved, thus creating capital in the marketplaces that businesses could borrow and use to expand, which drove up employment. So all of these factors have been dubbed the demographic dividend. And in fact, there's no developing country since World War II that has gone from developing to developed without first addressing fertility rates and family planning. So in places like Uganda, where, as Florence mentioned, in the north, in Karamoja, people may be having 7 children, they're mired in poverty and uneducated because of high fertility rate. People don't understand this. There are certainly economists who think that the more people there are, the more consumers there will be. But in fact, if people are too poor to consume, it doesn't improve the economy. So helping people understand the personal benefits of small family norms is really key to changing these norms.
Yeah.
You know, I'm wondering, kind of, as Bill was talking about, in Uganda specifically. Now, you've done work in Kenya too. How is the government more active in some countries than others in terms of like trying to move this demographic transition forward and trying to educate people on the ground about fertility rate and family size?
Yes, but many African countries have adopted population policies that are enlightened. Uganda, for example, as Florence mentioned, has a National Population Commission and a Population Secretariat. Jotham Musinguzi convinced the president of Uganda, Museveni, that there is a huge economic benefit to lower fertility rate. And the president appointed him to run the National Population Council. And their policy is to promote smaller family norms and use of family planning. So certainly that country in particular has recognized the importance at a policy level of achieving population stabilization. Some countries have not, and certainly in West Africa, there's still a lot of resistance to the idea of promoting family planning and small family norms.
Lawrence, you just mentioned the slum near Nairobi. And when I was in Nairobi, I didn't go into the slum, but I was near it. And of course, it's sort of world renowned, that particular slum, because it has something like well over 1 million people in it. And, you know, as a Westerner, as a person in the United States, you can like look at pictures in a book and you can say, oh, this is what it looks like. But I wonder if you could just, you know, from your own personal experience of being there, you know, just tell us what that slum is like and what it's like to be there and sort of, I guess, what is kind of the mindset of the people who are living there, because it seems really foreign to people in the United States, and I bet most of the listeners of this podcast.
Oh, well, I didn't even have to go to Kenya to see their slums, because they're all over Uganda, and they're creeping up even in Kampala, which is, the capital. So yes, slums are informal settlements, and they're characterized by, being ignored in terms of health. So sometimes you could find that someone in an urban slum is worse off than someone in a rural area, either in Nairobi, in Kenya, or in Uganda, and in any other country. Their access to contraception is much harder than even people in the villages. So yes, being in a slum, it's not an easy feat. It's survival for the fittest. They are squeezed together. And now during these times of COVID, I really wonder how that's happening. And there is open defecation. It happens. Well, if you're out in areas be like Karamoja, whereby they're spread out, it's not easy really to contract a disease. But here they're all squeezed together. So it's much easier to contract if there is a contagious disease. Yes, slums are characterized by, lack of access to water and sanitation. You find that, many households sharing just one latrine. I'm not even saying toilet, latrine. I don't know if Americans know what latrines are. But most people are used to, flushing toilets. But yes, we have mostly latrines. Of course, now we're getting into constructing toilets, but then the water is a problem. So there's a lot of waste which goes into the rivers. And in fact, I was working on a project there with some boys who are involved in waste management in the slum, and we were supporting them because they had a program whereby they meet as, there are people in the community, they give them some advice on family planning and give them condoms, but also look at, how to manage waste and clear even Nairobi River. And there were other guys that I was working with in Korogocho slum, another slum also in Nairobi, one of the fourth largest actually in the country. And they're also, clearing the environment, clearing the river, and you can see, what they do. And what stood out for me with the other slum in Korogocho is that they said they're always picking babies out of the rivers, dead. Mm-hmm. Dead. Like almost every week they pick about 5, they remove about, so, and they're calling. And then we told them, do you know what the problem is? Like, well, girls are getting pregnant. Girls these days, they don't care about, this stems from, a lot of problems, including, having no access to sexuality education. It's a major issue out there. So young girls, they end up having unsafe abortions, which is really a huge problem. And then recently, Kenya, Uganda, and some other countries, including the USA, actually just signed Geneva Congressional something on, preventing abortions, or not supporting any country at all that, carries out abortion and stuff like that. But I feel like we are just burying our heads under the sand, and abortions mostly happen in those informal settlements, and they're unsafe, and they're increasing. They contribute greatly to maternal mortality rates, which are very high out there. So these are things we are ignoring, but they are happening in those slums especially. Mm-hmm. So most people go hungry in slums,
And, Florence, I wonder, in Uganda and the other areas that you worked in Africa, how do you perceive like the influence of the United States? You mentioned that, American policy has an impact on family planning and birth control and those kinds of things. How do you see it sort of playing out there, whether America is engaged on these issues or not engaged, and, sort of the transition we've saw the last few years?
Well, America has been, of course, a great partner, but the latest, the global gag rule has been quite an impediment, because when the president signed, it has showed a bit of progress. So,
real quick, tell us what the global gag rule is, and just some background on that. Yeah.
We have UNFPA working so much in our countries, marriage stops, all of these, they no longer receive, the sufficient funding because they assist, with abortion-related services, you know. And like I said, abortion is a problem, honestly. In Uganda, I think about 300,000 abortions are carried out per year, and most of them are unsafe, and they lead to, you know, maternal mortality. They're a great contributor. So yes, while the US has been supporting us for a long time, I feel like the global gag rule is really gagging us.
And I want to make a little transition to kind of a delicate topic, but we're going to talk about it. You know, Florence, you became a little bit even more famous a few weeks ago or recently, because you wrote a very provocative blog on Earth Overshoot Day, and it was on their website, and it got shared very widely. And I don't know if you know exactly how widely it got shared, but it got shared very widely. And a lot of people know your name and know your face now. And so you chose to speak out about the issue of population growth in your home country, and how people aren't talking about it, and sort of why people aren't talking about it, including some of the names people get called when they talk about population growth. So tell us a little bit about, you know, what you called it a rant. You're just fed up.
I was ranting.
And you
Honestly,
said, that's it. Go ahead. Tell us about this blog.
Gary, honestly, the world's population is expected to grow by almost 2 billion people between now and 2050. It's doubling in Africa, you know, in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, including, you know, Uganda, you know, Nigeria, those big countries. And of course, Uganda's unprecedented growth. I don't know if I've already mentioned, it's about 3 to 3.5% per year, the annual population growth. So for a country like mine, it means that the population is going to be doubling even every 20, 23, 25 years. And for me, it means just one thing. And already I mentioned that, you know, 60% of the population is under 17 years in most districts, you know, 60%. So for me, this means one thing. Young girls and women in my country and in sub-Saharan Africa, actually, in general, are shackled to childbearing and child rearing. You know, our fertility transition, granted, started way too late, and it's told, and we've already mentioned the reasons why this is happening. There's a lot of patriarchy, you know, polygamy, you know, male dominancy, desire to have a male child. You know, I was in Kenya, and these women we met were telling us, wow, there is this particular tribe. Well, it's all tribes, I must say. You get a girl, you're going to be kicked out of the house if a boy doesn't come. So, you know, you keep on being a child bearer until you die or until the boy comes. And trust me, all this is having an impact on our girls and women. The cost is so high, and the cost is maternal mortality. Most of them are dying in childbirth or during pregnancy, you know, pregnancy-related causes. It's so high. Nigeria, I think a country like Nigeria has over 900 per every 100,000, you know, live birth. In Uganda, it has just come down, but we are still as high as 300 something. In the developed world, it's unheard of. I think it's even below 10 per every 100,000. So why can't we get to these levels? You know, fertility is high. Women are just producing year in, year out, year in, year out, and they're starting young. Because like I said, girls are married off, or even, you know, they just start engaging in relationships, because if you can't finish school, because most of us drop out at primary level, what else is there for you to do? There's a lot of poverty. Your parents prefer you to just go and be with a man. I've met young girls in Kamuli district in eastern Uganda, where it's a huge problem. They start giving birth as early as 13, 14, and they're okay with it. And their parents are like, hello, we've also experienced that. That's what we've been through. So for me, you know, population growth means just one thing: tying women down to just, you know, being child bearers. And other things matter to us. And like you'd ask, does climate change matter in Uganda? You know, does biodiversity matter in Uganda? All of these things matter. And even if you may think of, you know, per capita consumption, we are nowhere near the UK or the US, but we are experiencing these changes. Uganda's seasons are getting wetter. You know, there are frequent droughts. Our wetlands are disappearing because, you know, people are looking for land for agriculture. Forest cover loss in many districts is as high as 50%, some at 70%. In my own Mayuge district at 100%, some are totally been decimated. The glaciers on Mount Renzori are also disappearing. And all of this is going to impact agriculture, which is our main backbone, subsistence farming, we rely on it, and there's so many of us. And this, for me, I feel like it's impacting women the most. So all these factors, even which are happening, clearing forests and all of this, we are likely to see an increase in malaria prevalence, which is a huge problem and which mostly affects women because, we are always pregnant, always having children and diseases. We still have high HIV burden. We still have high malaria prevalence. All of these mixed, they affect the children the most. They affect the pregnant women. And we do not want to go back. We've started reducing mortality, under 5 mortality. If we go back to such, because when people die, people want to give birth to more people. And that has been the problem in the past, historically. They die, you're like, okay, let me have 7. I might lose 3, I might lose 5. We've really come out of that hole whereby people are like, 7, 4 will die, 3 will be saved. And then, so I don't want us to go back there. And it's the women who are suffering the most. This is affecting us. So anyway, is it racist if someone comes up with humane, voluntary solutions without compulsion, by the way, because that's very important, to reduce this growth, increase contraceptive prevalence, empower young girls and women through quality education, greater economic independence, ensure they can have agency. We don't have this decision autonomy to just, choose our path. We don't have that. We want to see us getting out of poverty, which is driving child marriages, like a brother says, driving teenage pregnancies, and it's also driving the total fertility rate in the country. So yeah, I don't see it as racist. Racism does exist, that is a fact. But here people calling people racist, genius, like no one wants anyone to die. We don't mind the numbers which are already here. We need to plan for them actually, which is also a problem actually that we have back home. Like Bill mentioned, I think the demographic dividend somewhere. So, we need all of that. We need that enlightenment that has already been experienced by young girls and women in Europe, in North America, and now in Asia. We need all of this. We are yet to have the social and economic development that has favored high-income countries, helping them keep their low fertility, helping them see their women go to schools, access different services, and have a voice. Trust me, you'll find a woman out there, she's even afraid to go and talk to a doctor because she can't express herself. And we know for a fact that education is very, very helpful. It takes women out of a lot of issues. Like if you're educated, you're able to decide for yourself whether you take contraceptives. If you have a child, you're likely to educate your child. You are likely to to offer good nutrition to the child. The high rate of stuntedness in Uganda actually it has just come down. It was above 30%. Now it's at around 28 point something percent, which is still bad. So many of us malnourished, undernourished. And of course, we have now the double burden of disease coming in as well. So we are going to be seeing a bit of obesity out there. But so I don't see really a problem if someone is coming with these humane solutions, whether that person is white, whether that person is black or brown or purple. Like, I do not see an issue. And I wish people could just stop tying in the racism. Of course, I talked about compulsion. Historically, population has had a bit of problems. When there was the one-child policy in China, forcing people, I know that came out of it. In India, during Mrs. Gandhi's time. But right now, no. People are right to worry about, the moral aspects of talking about, population and, talking about people's homes and stuff like that. But hey, Americans, do you want to see us continue just giving birth year in, year out, dying, not having education, being tied into poverty? No, seriously, is that what's happening out here? I would love to know. Although I just discovered that over 240,000 children are married here legally, children in America. So that's also a shocker to me. Those are things I would love to see ending. Young girls always and women pushed into this. So it just makes me go into a rant. I hope I didn't just go into a rant right now.
No, that was a wonderful rant, and thank you very much for giving it to us.
Certainly, I think the name calling, which is not unique to America, but particularly prevalent in this country, is an issue. And I think Florence really nailed it in terms of how to address the issue in the context of the reality of people's lives. Florence talked about child marriage. In northern Nigeria, it is typical for girls to be sold into marriage at age 10, 11, or 12. And they start having children as soon as they're fertile. And they suffer often because they're not physically ready to be bearing children as children themselves. They often suffer severe problems from trying to deliver. Obstructed labor can go on for days, and the pressure can kill enough tissue that it leaves the woman incontinent. And this condition called obstetric fistula affects tens of millions of women in Nigeria alone, not to mention Uganda and Ethiopia and many other countries. And when girls are kept in school rather than being put into marriage, it changes their whole situation and gives them the ability to determine how many children they want and to play a role in family decisions and to be much more educated about the benefits of things like family planning and proper nutrition for the children and so on. So when you explain to people that in fact people are suffering because of practices like child marriage, a huge human rights violation, and addressing these issues through human rights approaches like girls' education, it changes the conversation because nobody wants to see that. And it's not an issue of somebody telling somebody else what to do, and particularly doing so with racist motivations. But as Florence said, there certainly are people who are racist, and there certainly are people who are concerned about childbearing by people of other races or tribes. And so it is important to call out racism where it exists and to discuss racism and to discuss the reasons that racism persists. But when the work is rooted in a human rights context, it's pretty hard for people to find it as racist. In fact, it's a unmitigated good because it's improving the health and economic welfare of people, as well as preventing child marriage and the violence that goes with that in terms of the impact on the body and the lack of any rights by a girl to decide whom she's going to marry and whether she's going to have children, because she's being brought up by her husband and she has no concept of what her own rights are. So changing the discussion of human rights and women's rights to focus on the importance of the self-efficacy of women is, I think, the most important thing we can respond to people who think this is all racist, by pointing out that there is a huge amount of suffering and poverty that can be undone through human rights approaches like stopping child marriage. There's an organization Population Media Center is a member of called Girls Not Brides, and they have chapters virtually in every country in the world.
People in the world, I knew what child marriage is, but not much more. But then I started looking a bit into the issue, and I had no clue how enormously big this problem is.
Child marriage violates her rights to a life free of violence and a life of choice. It deprives her of her childhood. By addressing child marriage, we are protecting universal human rights.
If you tackle child marriage, you are looking at the cause of maternal and child deaths, you are looking at the cause of diminishing developmental activities in the country, you are looking at the cause of gender-based violence, you are looking at the cause of sexual and reproductive health issues.
This is the issue all over the world.
They're very important organization in terms of ending this practice of early marriage, which grows out of the belief that girls are a liability. And after spending enough money to raise them to age 10 or 11, it's best to recoup the losses by selling them. But when you think about selling a daughter into marriage when she has no education, it is one of the worst human rights violations, and it's affecting millions of women around the world every year. So we see this as a key issue, and we've in fact addressed this issue in many countries. For example, in Nepal, we did a program addressing child marriage. Nepal has among the highest rates of child marriage on the planet. And our listeners were more than twice as likely as non-listeners to report intervening to stop a child from being married after they had listened to the program. So, and in Senegal, where we addressed this issue, our listeners were 6 times as likely as non-listeners following the program to believe that a woman should be at least 18 years old to be married. So certainly there have been terrible mistakes made in the area of population, and yet most of what has been accomplished has been totally voluntary. When you look at Europe, outside of Romania, which banned contraception and forced women into pregnancy, most of Europe has achieved very low fertility rates totally voluntarily. And that is true of much of Asia as well, despite the disaster of coercive sterilization in India under Indira Gandhi's tenure and the one-child policy in China, which has now ended. But nevertheless, much of what has been accomplished has been totally voluntary. And you know, when you talk to people about, well, do you use family planning? They say, yes, of course. The question is, what is wrong with helping other people understand the benefits of using family planning, delaying childbearing until adulthood, and spacing of children for better nutrition? This is what this work is all about.
Yeah.
This is absolutely a human rights issue, which you guys have very eloquently said. It is also absolutely an environmental issue. Yeah. And so, we got to find some way to normalize this conversation so that environmental groups can have it again too. Florence, what are your thoughts on just like how to tell the story from an environmental perspective? And how do you tell American environmentalists, you have to talk about this because look at the impact it's having on my country, et cetera.
Almost other environmental organizations ignore the fact that, they're talking about all the causes of, the crisis, the degradation, but they never mention population growth. I'm glad that in my country, at least they recognize the fact that it's a problem. For example, there was a survey done in 2015, a National Service Delivery Survey, which found that 40% of the observed degradation of the environment was attributed to the current population growth. And I've already mentioned I've looked at some countries' biodiversity reports, including Nigeria, where they admit that population growth is contributing immensely to decimation of the forests. Forests are disappearing. There is a lot of overfishing. By the way, Uganda, we export fish here to the US. So our lakes are practically getting depleted and the waters are reducing. Of course, we already have problems with the water hyacinths. So there are these problems, and yet the environmental NGOs decide to turn a blind eye to what's driving the pollution, to what's driving this overexploitation, to what's driving the agriculture, to what's driving everything. It's humans behind all of this consumption. And that's why we talk about the Paul Ehrlich's equation, the IPAT. I equals PAT, the impact on the environment, population equals population growth, the affluence, that is the rising consumption, and technology, mostly the damaging technology. So it's frustrating when most people, especially environmental organizations, think that population has no bearing at all. It does. It does have a bearing. And like one naturalist whom we treasure so much in the UK, sorry, I was staying in the UK for the past 5 years, so I feel like I'm still part of the UK. That is Sir David Attenborough, who is a patron of Population Matters and is also an ambassador of WWF, by the way. So I wonder if they're going to also sack him. He always talks about population issues, and he says, there's a famous quote, all environmental problems become easier to solve with fewer people and harder, and ultimately impossible to solve with ever more people. And that is true, it holds. So these organizations should start promoting the solutions that we've already mentioned with Bill, that empower young girls and women, that empower everyone, education, family planning, which Project Drawdown, which is a respectable organization, they always find solutions to climate change, what is the biggest problem. And they listed educating girls as well as giving family planning as a step forward, because education helps, show up resilience and equips young girls and women to face the impacts of climate change. And they are more, empowered. So I feel like we should stop burying our heads in the sand. Yes, American NGOs get on board, UK NGOs, all of the high income countries. And you see, this is where the problem is. When you go to Africa, you find that the environmental organizations out there are more open. And in fact, we partnered during World Population Day with the Nigerian Conservation Foundation when I was in the UK and went to Nigeria. And they were all talking about population growth as a main driving factor behind all of the problems that are happening to the environment. Yes, consumption is a huge problem. Yes, there are rich people, like the 1% who are consuming all resources, or even them when they're producing, they're also producing for a big population. So we should just stop just saying, oh, it's only consumption. Population does matter.
There's, I think, a great example of an organization that has broken the norm of environmental organizations being silent on population, and that's the Center for Biological Diversity. They are famous for their endangered species condoms, and they've used that as a humorous way to bring up the population issue and its role in threatening biodiversity. And in fact, the UN Environment Program last year in 2019 issued a report on the 100 million species that are threatened with extinction. And the top reasons they cited were population related. They were expanding human habitation and expanding human farming to feed the growing human population. As Lester Brown used to say, if you visited this planet 3 billion years ago, you would not have survived a minute because you couldn't drink the water, you couldn't breathe the air, and there was no food. A toxic environment would have prevented any human from surviving. And it took 3 billion years of the evolution of the web of life that we now call biodiversity to make the planet habitable. And our expanding population is systematically destroying that web of life and pushing us closer and closer to ecological collapse. And population is the primary driver of that huge environmental threat. It's also, as Florence mentioned, a factor in climate change. It's not the only factor, in consumption of energy by and other environmental impacts by the West is the major driver. But about 25% of climate change is driven by the growing number of humans. We've got 225,000 people at the dinner table tonight who were not there last night, and tomorrow there'll be another 225,000 people, and all of those people have carbon footprints. So the 2 billion people we're expecting between now and 2050 is the climate equivalent of adding 2 United States to the planet. It's not the only thing driving climate change, but it's a big factor and can be easily addressed through human rights approaches like girls' education and making family planning information and services available.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I could sit here all day and have this conversation with you guys. And hopefully we can have you on the show some other time and talk about some other and newer issues. Whenever you get blogs out or stories, please send them to us so we can maybe bring them back on the show. So Bill, it's been great to have you on the show.
Gary, thank you so much. Have greatly enjoyed it and enjoyed particularly participating in this with Florence.
Yeah, and Florence,
me too, Bill.
Thank you very much for being on the show with us, Florence.
Thank you, Gary. It was nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and I'm Gary Wockner. I'm the host of Overcoming Overshoot here on EarthX TV.